what Paul came to suddenly realize is that he had been very wrong about the map. He came to suddenly realize that he read the map wrong. But the map was never wrong. He thought the map said something in particular, and he was driving as hard as he could according to what he thought the map said. But he was blind and he was delirious. He didn't read the map correctly. He didn't read his surroundings correctly. He didn't know really where he was and the direction he was going. But the map was never wrong. In this case, the Old Testament is that map. The Old Testament was the map. But because of Paul's sin and blindness, he misread the map, he misread the Old Testament, and he came to see Jesus and the followers of Jesus, the Christians, as the enemies. He came to see them as enemies, and so he believed that he was following the map accurately by persecuting the Christians, by trying to crush and destroy this following of Jesus of Nazareth. But when he was on his way to Damascus, sure of the direction he was going, sure that it was right, Jesus appeared in that blinding light, that light that's brighter than the sun. And in that moment, Paul knew that Jesus of Nazareth was risen from the dead. He was alive. He really was alive. The thing that he had been hoping for, the thing that he knew the Old Testament pressed them for, had happened, had begun to happen. Jesus was risen from the dead. He was obviously alive from the dead. And so in that moment, Paul realized that the very thing he had always hoped for, the resurrection, the thing that the Pharisees longed for and lived for and strove for, the thing that all of Israel had always hoped for, had happened. It had actually happened in Jesus of Nazareth. And while Paul was going the wrong way, it turned out to be exactly the way the scriptures said blind men would go. It's in there too. You read the Old Testament, and what does it say? That they'll reject the Messiah, that they won't see him, that they will have blind eyes and they won't recognize the salvation of God. And in thinking that they're serving him, they'll persecute him. Paul says it's there too. That's there too. In 1 Corinthians 15, you have one of the most succinct summaries of the gospel. So if you ever wanted a text and you say just a short text that summarizes the gospel really simply, 1 Corinthians 15 is a great text for this. If you ever, someone says, but exactly what is the gospel? 1 Corinthians 15. Just a couple verses. He says, let me just remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you have received, wherein you stand, by which you are saved, if you keep in memory what I preached unto you, unless you've believed in vain. And then in verse 3, he says, for I delivered unto you, first of all, that which I also received, how that Christ died for our sins, according to the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day, according to the scriptures. It's almost like Paul's trying to make a point. According to the scriptures. Now remember, Paul's writing in the first century. What are the scriptures? Well, primarily the Old Testament, right? There may be a few of the Gospels beginning to have been written, but it's not much of the New Testament. It's not all complete yet. He's primarily talking about the Old Testament. According to the Old Testament. According to the Old Testament. And he says it twice. He died for our sins, according to the Old Testament. He was buried and that he rose again the third day, according to the Old Testament. It's not just that it really happened. That's true. It's not just that it really happened, it's that it really happened according to the Old Testament. It really happened according to the scriptures. And Paul is making the same point here on trial. He's making the same point here on trial as he talks to King Agrippa. He's on trial because of the hope of the promise made to the fathers. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. He's on trial because he's been saying none other things than those which the prophets and Moses did say should come. Again, verse 22. Moses and the prophets. Which, if you think about it, means Paul is underlining the fact that God was right all along. Every time he says that, according to the scriptures, just like they said, just like it says in the Old Testament, just like Moses and the prophets, he's effectively saying he was right all along and I was wrong. Sort of a diplomatic way of saying that. Just like it says. Just like it says. The thing that Paul had given himself his whole life to, studying the Bible, the Old Testament, gave his whole life to it. And he read it wrong. He was blind. It was right there the whole time. And so every time Paul says, just like it says, you almost got to imagine a smirk on his face, just like it says. I read it, and I read it, and I read it, and I didn't see what it said. And it's right there. I called my wife this week with a great idea. And she said, this is a great idea. Do you remember how I mentioned that to you a few weeks ago? Just like you said. It's all there. And we are blind. And we're deaf. And it's right there. And we don't see it. And we don't hear it. Paul, in effect, is saying, we were wrong about the map. But the map is right.